D&D has a lot of strong spells, from Firebolt that destroys entire armies, to Polymorph turning enemies into harmless animals. But did you know that the magic you see today in D&D is extremely weak compared to what it used to be? Back in the days, concentration didn't exist, saving throws were optional, and balance was nowhere to be found. Bonjour! In today's video, we will go over the D&D spells that experienced the most brutal nerfs. For this ranking, we are going to go back through time. Let me take you all the way back to 1977, when the first spell on this list was created.
Number 6.
Fly.
I can show you the world.
This iconic spell has been here since the beginning. In AD&D, the first official version of D&D, it was also a third level spell, and had a casting time of 3 segments. If that sounds confusing, don't worry. All you need to know is that you had super fast spells with a casting time of 1 segment, and long spells with a casting time of up to 10 segments. The idea being that the more segments a spell had, the more likely it was that the enemies would get an attack in before you finish casting, causing you to lose the spell. To be fair, if you got hit as a wizard back then, you would just die, which I guess technically would also make you lose the spell. So 3 segments is roughly equivalent to a casting time of 1 action today. Fly would last 10 minutes per caster level, plus 1d6 times 10 minutes. You'll notice that it's 10 minutes per caster level, not per spell level. This means that at 5th level, when you got this spell, the duration was actually a minimum of 1 hour. And the funny part is that the additional duration, the one determined by rolling a d6, was rolled secretly by the DM. So if you tried pushing your luck and flying for more than an hour, you could just randomly fall out of the sky. And with the AD&D rules, that was often a death sentence. But the risk was well worth it, because concentration was not a thing, meaning that you could keep blasting your other strong spells while staying away from danger. Or, at later levels, make your entire team fly without breaking a sweat. And the speed was really good too! At a base of 120 feet per round speed indoors or 360 feet outdoors, very few monsters could catch you. Then 2nd edition rolled around and they kept it mostly the same. But they did modify a couple of things. First, they increased the speed to 180 feet indoors or 540 feet outdoors. But they added the requirement that casting the spell required some focus, meaning that you had to slow down your flight to be able to cast other spells. But considering the speed you were going at, you can't really call that a nerf. No, the nerfs came with 3.5e. They removed the random duration, which was nice, but dramatically shortened it. From 1 hour minimum at 5th level to 5 minutes. They slashed the speed too, reducing it to a standard of 60 feet indoors and outdoors. But they did put a buff to the spell. If it ever ended or was dispelled, instead of crash landing and dying, you would safely fall to the ground, featherfall style. Then 4th edition came around and I'm not going to cover it. It was so different from the rest of the editions that it would take too long to explain. Instead, we'll jump to today with 5e. The spell now requires concentration, which massively limits what other spells you can cast while this is active. And the duration no longer increases with your level, instead being a flat 10 minutes. They also got rid of the featherfall effect, so crash landing is back on the menu. But there is a silver lining. You can now upcast Fly to target multiple creatures.
Honorable mention.
Honorable mention for Wish, a spell that didn't make it on the list because it's still so strong today. It's hard to imagine that it was more broken than it already is, but trust me, it was. Back then, it just didn't have any limitations. No risk of permanently losing the ability to cast the spell. Whatever you wanted, you'd just get it. For example, I wish for a wife. Alright, okay, well in that case, I wish for an 18-inch...
Meaning ship for D&D combat.
Hey, that was my wish.
Wanna get some action tonight?
A ship is fine. Voidsea is a grimdark, eldritch-infested, high seas expansion for 5e. They created epic new rules for ship combat, which, if you've ever played a pirate campaign, looking at you, Saltmarsh, you know are not easy to find. By the way, this is not a sponsorship. I'm not getting a penny from them. I just really like the project and I'm friends with the people behind it. But for full transparency, they did send me this 18-inch mimic ship, though I would have rather had the 18-inch penis. You get awesome new abyssal races and subclasses, as well as the ability to kill boss monsters and harvest them to turn them into items. And if you're an early backer, you get an exclusive set of dice. Build the naval campaign of your nightmares.
Every backer gets a set of miniatures, wife not included.
Click the link in the description to learn more.
Number 5.
You're too slow.
Haste is one of the strongest spells in the game, allowing you to shatter the action economy. It's hard to imagine that it was stronger than what it is today, but it was. First, let me start with OD&D, the true original version of D&D. Haste was described as, this spell does the opposite of the slow spell and counters it. So what does slow do? Slow is a broad area of effect spell that can affect up to 24 creatures. It lasts 3 rounds. Okay, cool. Guess I'll just go fuck myself then. Anyway, now you understand why I won't talk much about OD&D. The rules were kind of a mess. Instead, let's start with AD&D. With a casting time of 3 segments, so roughly an action, it would not affect one creature. No. It would affect a 40-foot by 40-foot square, affecting a number of creatures equal to your wizard level. So a 5th level wizard casting it could buff all of their allies. And what did the spell do exactly? Oh, nothing much really. Just double all your movement. Oh, and double all your attacks. At least, thankfully, it didn't affect spellcasting, but fighters would turn into lawnmowers. Especially because back then, the number of attacks you would make was tied to the level of your enemies. So a 10th level fighter with haste on could make something like 20 attacks against kobolds in a single turn. So AD&D 2E came around, saw this madness and decided to nerf it. Gary Gygax was tired of people trying to break his game. So he brought a bazooka to the balancing table. They made it so that the target of the spell would also age 1 year, due to their metabolism speeding up. That might sound harmless, but it isn't. If you hasted a creature, it had a chance to just die, due to a rule I haven't talked about yet. That's the system shock rule. A text that says that anytime your body goes through drastic changes because of magic, such as being polymorphed, turned into stone, or magically aged, you had to roll for system shock. A percentile dice that you rolled, and if you failed, you just died. Onto 3.5e, where a big nerf was waiting. There, you could still target the number of creatures equal to your wizard level, but the effects were much more tame. Instead of doubling all your attacks, you would just get 1 additional attack. And the speed increase was also nerfed, limited now to 30 feet of extra movement. But because they felt bad about weakening haste, they gave it some defensive properties, increasing your AC and your dex saves by 1. Then we got 4th edition, which completely revamped combat and actually caused the biggest nerf to the spell. The spell now affected 1 creature for 1 turn, giving them 1 extra action, which they could use for 1 attack. And it was moved to be a bard-only power, accessible at level 16. Now, keep in mind 4th edition went all the way to level 30, so that's more equivalent to a bard level 11, but still. Then 5e came around and brought back to life the spell we know and love today, which is really just a single target version of the 3.5e spell, but they did add a couple of nerfs. First, concentration, and second, now when the spell ends, instead of randomly just dying, you instead get lethargic for a turn.
Number 4.
Polymorph,
I am just following my...
also known as the spell that made me go insane researching it. The main reason why is because back in the days, Polymorph was actually 2 spells. Polymorph Self and Polymorph Others. In AD&D, Polymorph Self was pretty straightforward. It was 4 segments to cast, so about an action, and you would gain any movement the creature had. So flying or swimming speed, or the ability to squeeze in narrow spaces if you turned into a slime. Yes, you heard that right. You could turn into any kind of creature, not just beasts. Your hit points would remain the same, and so would your abilities. You could even keep casting spells, so long as the new form allowed for vocal components. And each turn, you could use your action to turn into a different creature. And it would last 20 minutes per wizard level. All in all, a solid spell. The real broken one was Polymorph Others. So let me start by saying this. The spell did not require any saving throws. See that dragon right there? It's a tiny turtle now. but it had a couple of very funny quirks. First, the creature would retain its original saving throws and hit points, but the rest of it would transform. So the tiny turtle is actually a tank with the health of a dragon. Second, if you reduce the target to 0 hit points, it would revert back to its original form. Slight problem with that though. The creature would revert back and be dead. Third, because Gygax was tired of players using this spell to turn their allies into dragons or other broken monsters, System Shock made a comeback. So if you attempt to polymorph someone, they roll, and if they fail, they die. And if they succeed the first time, they have to roll again when they transform back, and risk dying again. Which is funny, because it sounds to me like this nerf just made it deadlier against your enemies. AD&D 2e didn't change things much, Polymorph Self just stayed basically the same with a bit more flavor text. On the other hand, Polymorph Other Hand finally received a saving throw. Which is not a regular save, but a polymorph negate save. You know a spell is being abused when it gets its own custom saving throw. They also added a secondary, less important save. It was based on intelligence, and it was to see if the creature retained its mental faculty or adopted the ones of the new form. To emphasize the point, they even added flavor text saying that if you turned the wizard into a stone, but they saved and kept their mental faculty, they would go insane over time. Then 3rd edition came around and oh boy, the nerf hammer came hard. Polymorph Self became Polymorph, which allows you to turn into basically any creature type, but with limits on the creature's size and hit dice, basically challenge rating. You would gain abilities like flight and natural weapons, but not spells. Suddenly you had wizards turning into trolls for regeneration or into hydras for multi-attack. Polymorph Others got renamed to Baleful Polymorph and bumped up to 5th level, turning enemies into harmless animals permanently. But now with the saving throw to see if you transform and another one for your sanity. As you can imagine, this led to a ton of exploits, leading WotC to issue errata after errata until finally they came up with a new version of the game, 3.5e. There they tightened everything up. No more gaining crazy abilities. The list of monsters you could turn into was very limited, and Baleful Polymorph got changed so that you couldn't turn someone into a harmless pet if they were too strong. 4th edition, being the black sheep as usual, ditched polymorph altogether, instead creating a ton of variants, such as polymorphic form, but going over all of them and explaining them would take forever, and this video is long enough as it is. Fast forward to 5e, and polymorph finally got streamlined into something sane. Now it's a 4th level spell, and it finally joined the concentration camp. Wait, no, that sounds like something like an Austrian painter would say, which is not what I meant. It got concentration for up to an hour, and you can only turn one creature into a beast of a CR equal or lower to its level. Probably the biggest nerf to the spell, massively limiting what you can turn into. On top of that, they shifted all the broken stuff, not to 5th or 6th level, but all the way to 9th level with true polymorph. If you want to see some cool alternative spells to buff your party which are not polymorph or bless, you can check out my Patreon. We have a ton of content for D&D there, which you might enjoy.
Number 3.
Phantasmal Killer starts with AD&D. Illusions were a bit more basic back then. In 1st edition, Phantasmal Killer was a 4th level spell accessible by illusionists only. Yeah, Illusionist was its own class. Wizards couldn't touch it. It was kind of like a subclass before subclasses were a thing. And fun fact about illusionists, they had even less health than wizards. Phantasmal Killer had a casting time of 4 segments, so about an action. The caster pulls out the deepest fear from the target's mind and shapes it into a visible monster which attacks immediately. The victim could try to disbelieve the spell once with an intelligence check, but if it failed, the spell took effect for a number of rounds equal to your wizard level, so a minimum of 7. And most monsters were not very intelligent, so it would work on 90% of them. The illusion would get its own turn and attack, and if it hits, the target would just die. Heart attack, even if it's an undead. Hence the name Phantasmal Killer, because it would create an illusion of your greatest fear, which would literally kill you. And I guess because other names like memories of your uncle locking you in your basement to molest you were already taken. I miss Uncle Richard sometimes. The only way to end the spell was to kill the caster or knock yourself out for the duration of the spell so that it wouldn't affect you. Problem is, a fireball still hits you when you're unconscious. That spell did have a funny quirk though. If you had a form of telepathy and you disbelieved the illusion, you could then turn it back towards the caster, who had to then themselves disbelieve it or die. The second edition kept it mostly the same, with what I would call some mild nerfs. If the target of the illusion had resistance to fear or against magical effect, they would get a bonus to disbelieve the illusion. In addition, spells like Remove Fear would allow you to remake the check to see if you would disbelieve. Then 3rd edition came in and the spell ate 3 major nerfs. First, many high-level monsters received the equivalent to True Sight, which automatically sees through illusions, because designers got tired of a low-level spell just one-shotting everything. Secondly, Phantasmal Killer removed the attack to hit mechanic, instead replacing it by a will save, basically wisdom, to see if you would disbelieve it, and if you didn't, then you'd have to make a fortitude save, basically a con save, to see if you would die. If you succeeded on the save, you would just take some damage. Third, the duration was changed. Instead of having a psycho killer chasing after you for multiple rounds, the spell became instantaneous. So make the saves once and you're good. Because monsters had such high fortitude saves, sudden death became way less common. By 3.5e, another nerf was implemented. The spell would now only affect living creatures with a mind. But it still absolutely could be exploited because you could stack debuffs on the enemy to make them have worst saves against fear. Now, let's talk about 4th edition. And we're done. Today in 5e, they decided that the 4th level instant kill spell was too strong, and instead changed the duration back to 1 minute, with concentration this time. Now instead of instant death, you inflict fear and some very serious psychic damage every time the creature fails the save. Which is funny because this means that despite how severely this spell was nerfed, it's still an incredibly strong spell. You'd be surprised, but this video took a long time to research and even more to record and edit. So, you know, if you can show your support by hitting the like and subscribe buttons, that'd be great.
Number 2.
When I say broken spells, what comes to mind? Wish? Simulacrum maybe? But I know one that's not coming to mind. Charm Person. And yet, back in the days, it was a god among spells. Trust me, there's a reason it's so high on this list. In OD&D, you know, that messy version of D&D I talked about earlier? Here are the rules of Charm Person. This spell can target any mammals that looks roughly humanoid, including giant apes like your mom. And the charmed creature would fall completely under the influence of the caster, basically becoming their servants. There was no limit on what you could order the creature to do, so you could give them suicidal commands. Oh, and did I mention that the effect of the spell was permanent and there was no repeat saving throws to escape it? At the time, it was used to create permanent minions that would join your party, and as you can imagine, that led to slight balance issues. Because you could roll up to a boss fight with an entire village charmed under your command. So when AD&D came about, they decided that maybe the spell needed a change. The first major nerf was the control you exerted over the target. They would still be your but they would no longer kill themselves for you. Though you could absolutely convince them to put themselves in danger.
I was right there!
And they added a saving throw to end the spell early. So now you could repeat the saving throw once per month. I'm not kidding. It was based off of intelligence, and only creatures with a 19 intelligence or higher could repeat the saving throw daily. Otherwise, it was multiple weeks. Because clearly, it took a genius to understand that if someone tells you, and I quote, hold back an onrushing red dragon for just a minute or two, maybe they were not your friend. Anyway, AD&D 2e came around, saw the mess that the spell was, and decided to implement a few changes. So, here's what changed. Nothing. Alright then, moving on. 3.5e, where actual nerfs happened. Gone were the days of permanent mind control at level 1. Actually, a lot of the changes they implemented then are what we see today in the spell. 1. The duration was massively nerfed. Instead of being month, it was reduced to 1 hour per wizard level. 2. The target gains a bonus to the saving throw if you're actively hostile towards it. 3. The orders you could give were now severely limited, and if you gave orders that went against someone's nature, you had to roll a contested check. So, if you told a lawful good paladin to burn down an orphanage, they'd have to roll a check, but say the same thing to a chaotic neutral rogue and they'd be happy to do so. I miss the flavor of alignment sometimes. The 3.5e also introduced the second major nerf to the spell. If you or your allies tried to attack the creature, the spell would end. because it turns out when someone is shoving their sword in your chest, maybe they don't want to be friends with you. Then 4ème édition happened, and it was once again the weird sibling of D&D. Because they were focusing on the tactical aspect of the game, they removed many narrative aspects, including narrative spells like Charm Person. I think the closest equivalent we got was a bard power which tricked someone into becoming your friend and giving you money. Just like my other uncle and his ex-wife. Then 5e came and cleaned up the whole thing. A fixed duration of 1 hour, but upcasting which allows you to target multiple creatures. A simple charm condition, which means that they can't attack you, and that you have advantage on social interactions with them. And finally, the third big nerf in this spell's history. The target now knows that it was charmed when the spell ends. But now it makes more sense as a first level spell.
Honorable mención.
Fireball, a spell that didn't quite make the list for most nerfed spells. So, for the sake of brevity, I'll explain what Fireball does today and then we'll see what it did back in the days. Fireball is a spell that takes an action to cast, has a range of 150 feet, and explodes in a 20-foot radius. The explosion wraps around corners and deals 8d6 fire damage on a failed dexterity saving throw, or half as much on a success. It is the staple of a strong offensive spell. But watch the original Fireball and weep. In AD&D, Fireball is a spell that takes 4 segments, so about an action to cast. And that's where the similarities end. It has a range of 240 feet indoors or 720 feet outdoors. You're not shooting a spell, you're shooting a bloody cannon. Then there is the explosion. Gary Gygax liked his math, so he made the explosion 33,000 feet cube. Technically, it's a 20-foot radius explosion, but in practice, it was not at all. Because instead of wrapping around corners, the explosion would conform to the area in which it detonates. This means that if you lobbed one of those damn things in a hallway that was 10 foot by 10 foot, everyone in a 330 foot line would get exploded by the spell. Or, when fighting outside, a clever wizard will point the explosion at the ground. Because the volume will have to be respected for half a sphere, making the radius bigger. Now you better understand the meme, I don't care how big the room is, I cast Fireball. Because back in the days, a wizard in a dungeon was a safety hazard because 9 times out of 10 they would catch themselves or their entire parties with them. In addition, Gygax was a bit of a troll and made it so that anything touched by the spell would catch fire, including your clothes, any parchments or spell scrolls that you would have, and even your gold would melt. You even had a chance of losing your magic items. And now we come to the second best part, the damage.
It's over 9,000!
When you first got Fireball at level 5, it would deal 5d6 fire damage. Which doesn't sound like much, but guess what was the health of most enemies at that level? 5d6 or less. But it got worse. The damage of the spell was equal to 1d6 per wizard level. So as you gained levels, the explosion would get more and more powerful. By level 10, with a 10d6 explosion, anything weaker than a dragon would get wiped from the map. Seriously, by this point call your Fireball Little Boy, and just like Little Boy, you got Fat Man in reserve and his 8 other nuke siblings because you have so many spell slots.
He's just standing there.
Number 1.
Permanency is a spell that most of you probably have not heard of. A spell so broken, it got nerfed into oblivion. Literally. Gary Gygax wanted to make a balanced game, so he implemented Vention Magic, basically the spell slot system that we know today. He then went on to create the Wish and Permanency spell and shot whatever balance there was right in the face. Permanence was a wizard's wet dream. It rendered spells like Detect Magic, Enlarge, Protection from Evil, or even Invisibility permanent. It could even be used on area of effect spells like Wall of Force. Feel the balance yet? The only drawback is that if you used it to buff yourself in some way, you would lose 1 constitution point. Which in practice never f***ing matters, because if you're invisible and have protection from evil, I can never hit you in the first place, so it doesn't matter if you're squishier. And if instead you targeted non-living things or area of effects, the probability that you would lose your con was lowered to 5%. As you can imagine, players abused it to create unkillable wizards or magic items galore, because yes, that was the thing you could do back then, create your own magic items. Second edition then rolled in and kept things mostly the same. They mostly added a DM caveat that said that you could make other spells permanent if the player researched it enough. And optionally, after 1000 years, there was a random chance that the permanency would fail. So the world force would just drop, or the magic item would just break in your hands. Which was mostly a narrative device for future campaigns where players would fight like an ancient artifact, and it would just crap out in the middle of battle. Then 3rd edition came around, and unlike all the other spells on this list, where usually 3rd edition was a big nerf hammer, I don't know that I would call what they did a nerf. Why? Well, they lowered it all the way from an 8th level spell to a 5th level one. Sure, they restricted the list of spells, but still. What they changed was the component of the spell. Instead of draining your constitution, it would drain your XP, with a set table listing the spells and listing the XP cost. But honestly, on some characters, I'd lose a level to gain permanency invisibility. In 3.5e, they tightened the list of available spells even further, but it was still crazy strong. Then 4th edition came about, and they decided to axe the spell, and permanency was permanently removed. Ironic. But today we still see remnants of it with spells like Teleportation Circle, which have a permanency clause, saying that if you cast the spell in the same spot every day for a year, it becomes permanent. La rivedere.